Christine, how about your group? Anybody down there got? Just one, tell us one thing. Just tell us one thing. Just tell us one thing.
Yeah, we discovered her interfaith dialogue work from her interfaith
dialogue, yeah.
interfaith work, and then her strong transnational and global feminist solidarity work. For example, her introduction of Ivan Guevara's work to the U.S. Academy, not economy, U.S. Academy, and also her work with Jean Zarou in Palestine, when she tried to introduce Jean Zarou's work in the United States. And then
that's great.
Yeah, then we talked about how to do theology from an artistic perspective. From an artistic perspective.
Yeah.
Also interreligious work interfaith dialogue.
Did you know she painted the portrait that's on the cover of that book? The
Voices of
yeah,
the Great.
yeah, and it's the kitchen of a woman named Betsy Collins, who was a journalist a European journalist, but Betsy Collins was one of the early women in the.
We need a trivia. We need a trivia.
Rosemary with her trivia.
She was on Jeopardy. Like, was the #1 Catholic feminist theologian, or but it was Rosemary.
You're kidding? She was on Jeopardy.
I'm kidding. My cousin saw it on TV.
That's funny.
Very funny. I'm sure there's some noses out of joint.
And I actually told Rosemary to just,
It rolled over me.
Yeah.
How about over here? How about you folks?
Well, I just took some notes.
Just one or two highlights, just to kind of.
That she was a painter, we didn't know that. And I think it was the same. She almost went to art school.
That was going to be her major
Yeah.
in college, and she decided against it, but she did watercolors and oils.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And then Catherine was saying was talking about which books was most important, and she mentioned letters between herself
Thomas
and
Merton.
Thomas Merton. Yeah, it's been a very sort of. I think most of said sexism got taught as a major.
But the letters to Thomas Merton, it's very interesting. She, I just heard an interview that she did about that, and she said she was very hard on Thomas Merton because she was at a point in her life when she was trying to figure out what it was that, she wanted to hear from theologians, and the priests, they're all priests, were so inadequate and so pitiful in their analysis and had such limited scope. They didn't have any, advanced biblical studies, they didn't have any sort of critical anything. And she said, I finally decided that I had to make the synthesis myself, and so I became a theologian. It's in a Christian Century article. That's how, and that's why we say these priests of a variety of qualities that they were so horrible. She became a theologian. So it's really, we have to thank them. Yeah, but I mean, that's a great line.
Yeah, and then in your book, sort of like that was a great question about what might be on the desk.
Did you find something?
Yeah. So we said things like refugee crisis.
Refugee crisis, right?
And working communities and new economies, and the Me Too movement and the child sex abuse crisis. Yeah, so those are why I talked about those.
Well, you got our work cut out for us, my dears. Great. Great. How about over here? How
Oh,
about over here?
yeah, we just talked again about the YouTube interview on William F. Buckley, Fire in Line, 1968. Mary Daly, Rosemary, and Sydney Callahan, and just how wonderful it was this evening.
Yeah, it's good. Make some popcorn and watch that. It's great.
Yeah, and we'll send, can we send the link out?
Yeah.
YouTube link, so people can watch that.
Sure. How about over here? Anything?
Well, I wanted to hear what Rosemary, she wouldn't have had it on her desk, but what she thought about synodality.
Yes.
I think that would be really interesting to hear what she had about synodality. And we were talking about having a debate actually about whether anything had changed since the 1968. Whether there'd been any progress for women since the 1968 television program. And because I was saying how watching that yesterday, and we were talking about how it seemed like they thought change was like round the corner, and I was saying how many Catholic women today think change is just round the corner, and I wonder whether it is. I don't. I've stopped wondering. I just decided to be.
It's like an up down. You know, you get a little hope, and then you get shut down again, and then there's a little bit of hope, and then you're shut down again, and then you get another jerk that says no, and you know it just goes on and on.
Well, it might also be around the literal corner. There are other churches in addition that have plenty of women leaders. Not to suggest that anyone do that. I thought it was really very laudable that Rosemary stuck to her tradition of origin, even though she did come from an ecumenical family. She stuck with the tradition that she was brought up in. Not because she agreed with everything that was there, but because she was committed to being the change she wanted to see. And I respect that.
Yeah, I'm not altogether persuaded that she stayed as close as people thought she did. I think she had much more interreligious insights and personal experience and faith in a wide range and very secular kind of faith. And I think that her approach was somewhat strategic, but I think over time, she and as many others of us have seen that there really isn't much, we really haven't seen change. I said that in my group, and I can go to the grave to say after 50 years, I haven't seen any change at all in Catholicism for women. In fact, I think it's gotten worse in some ways. I mean, I think, you know, it's worse because the contrast is so vivid between how, in terms of how the world has worked, that it's an embarrassment to, it's an intellectual, moral embarrassment. And I think Rosemary was so helpful in helping us to see a lot of that. But she wasn't as keyed in, at least in the later years. I don't think she belonged to a women's church group at Pilgrim Place. I don't think she was, you know, someone who went off terribly often, did she, to a parish?
I thought it was good what Christina said, that she gave us the words to articulate what we were feeling.
Yeah.
I actually identify myself with the term like spiritual activism. It's more closer to Gloria Angel's work, and no separation between activism and spiritual practice. But then her sense of like spirituality goes much deeper than like the Catholicism, where
Yeah, and I think she got bored with it too. I mean, you know, after a while, where you kind of, it's boring. I mean, to put your head against a wall, and, you know, you don't see change. It's very boring, and it's very dangerous, I think, to lead women in the direction of trying to change something that's so toxic. And I think she understood the toxicity. Yeah.
That's exactly what I kept thinking, and along the lines of what you were saying. And I wonder if that was, I hope something like that would have been on her desk. Because I worked in the Catholic Church for almost 20 years, and I worked alongside these nuns who, some of Rosemary's words as well as their own words, it's like, let's change it from within, let's be the change. And I wonder if all these years since Vatican II, and now with what's happening, would they still, because I think I tried to do that. I took their mantra and made it my own, and it almost killed me. And I don't say that dramatically, like, it was impossible to work in that structure. And there comes a point where you have to say, we need to build a new structure or find a different structure around the corner, you know. And I wonder, with that wisdom of years, would she agree? Would she, you know, what would have been?
Truly, I mean, in the early book on Women's Church, you know, you have architectural plans because she was an artist, and she understood that, you know, if you didn't change the environment, you didn't change the physical environment, you weren't gonna get that hierarchy out of the way. But she did a piece one time that she got Jane Baya, who's one of the Roman Catholic women priests, Remember that? And-
I
and,
have it.
Yeah, and I did the response from the more radical end, and Jane was doing the Roman Catholic woman priest thing, and Rosemary was trying to reconcile those two approaches. And so that was part of her job too, was to, she was trying to take those of us who were even more out there and didn't want to be priests, and want to see women, whatever.
Actually, her rewriting of Mary Magdalene's story at the very beginning of God, Exegesis and Gato, that summarizes all of our conversation about the Catholic Church and the wide message of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus is so misunderstood by all these male disciples.
Yeah, and I do remember too, and I would say this on Monday, but one of the things that happened in the Women Church movement was that we had a conference, and the bishops had invited Rosemary and Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza and a couple of other people to go and talk with them and have a dialogue. And so we did a blessing of them as they left the Women Church conference to go to this meeting. And they came back, and they were so horrified by the bishops, the catechetical level of the bishop's theological training. One bishop said, Jesus came to create a church. That was the level of this man's understanding theology. He was a bishop. That was what he understood theologically, was that Jesus had come to create a church.
Well, that's so dumb.
These women were so, and they they came away so completely disedified at what their competition, like if you have really smart people and you're in opposition to them, but to have such dolts having so much power, they really did. I mean, and it really, and of course they were never invited again. But just when you think about that, when you don't have worthy opponents and they have all the power, there's a point at which you really know something is very, very wrong. So that's where I think they got. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to point this out. I mean, this is the Australian context, but there's this book, Woman and Man, One in Christ Jesus, that came out of this study that was launched in 1996. It was surveying all the Australian women, Catholic women. So this is to do with the Catholic Church, and then they published this in 2000, and then recently and it had these things that you could implement to make the church more, women friendly, all of that sort of stuff. And there was a recent relook at that document, and also like sort of a survey of women, like, well, what are the sorts of things that you want in the church? And we found that most of the stuff that was suggested in that 2000 document is pretty much not yet implemented, and still something that women are still wanting to happen today. So that, yeah.
Well, I'll just
Can I just
introduce
say-
you. Yes, I was going to say introduce you to the Australians, and I'm going to close this off. So go ahead, Kat. No, Kat, please.
I wanted to say, Christina, that that's so true. The recommendations weren't implemented at all. They were just shelved. And not only that, the politics over the title. I was around then. The politics over the title, they could not have a national statement that only had woman in the title.
Oh, gosh.
So that is why and man got added, even though it was a survey of Catholic women.
And that's so interesting with the politics of the recent plenary council, because that's why
The bishops dissented. The bishops dissented because the statement was on the dignity of women and man, and they didn't feel like that women as mothers, as feminists in the feminine genius theology, had been embraced enough, and they didn't feel that men had also been acknowledged enough. And so that was the part of the reason why the bishops dissented on the statement. And they felt that all the women in the room were pro-ordination. But Sister Patty Faulkner, who was in the room, she said women's ordination was never even mentioned. But the perception, because the feminine genius theology wasn't acknowledged enough, women as mothers weren't acknowledged enough, and lay men weren't acknowledged enough. So it's exactly the same thing. And how many years later are we?
Woman and
Yes.
Man, One in Christ Jesus.
This is a wonderful conversation, and the best part of it is to have people who really know what they're talking about. And it is true. You come to a meeting like this, and you have people who really know what they're talking about and who are doing the talking. And many of us have been influenced by Rosemary Redford Ruther. I mean, just plain and simple. So I would like to just suggest the next steps of this. I've asked Rosalind to take a look at these materials with me, and we'll try to put out something that will, be just for your use. So I want all of these, Cap, could you go out, just like a, right, Cap, yeah, well, just grab these, don't let anybody go out the door without them. Naomi will get yours later. But it's so wonderful to have this and to have your reflections. Thank you. I want to also say that there will be the use of the video will be up so you can use this conversation. There will also be a report on the meetings, and tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I mentioned there will be this session. Could we just finish? Could I just finish so we can? Excuse me. Could I just finish so we can dismiss? We'll have a session tomorrow morning on the book. And I'd like to thank our colleagues who sent their remarks and those who read them. And I'd also like to thank Bethany and Nicole for tech support. And I just want you to think about it. Maybe somebody has an idea right off the top of their head. If we meet next year in San Antonio, which would be our custom, what might be a good topic for us to look at next year? Are there some thoughts about that for next year? Yeah, Elani?
So we had a really cool conversation at the Open Focus today in our table. And it started like this. What is your experience as being a woman and a mother, like in the academy? And the conversation went to, started with menopause, and then blood and period and miscarriage and abortion. And we spoke a lot about health issues and dealing with health issues, being a woman in the academy, trying to make into like promotion and tenure and sharing with colleagues about what's going on with you personally. And there was a lot of conversation about blood. About what? Blood and your period and things like that. And it was just so interesting that we all were sharing about how we go through like health issues, but women's health issues are not spoken in the academy. And we linked it to capitalism and patriarchy and so on.
Yeah, and the questions around healthcare as a right,
Yeah.
especially in this country. And anybody else, just that's a great set of issues, but anybody else, just things that we should be taking up as we move along? Yes, please.
Have you ever, and you know, this is out of the blue and I don't expect you to work on this, but have you ever, sure, have you ever talked about lactation?
About
Lactation.
Oh, lactation. No, I'm not.
We had a panel on motherhood a couple of years ago.
But we should not exclude, I mean, there are many trans and queer people, and there are so many people who talk about motherhood. I'm also a mother and a queer person, and so I think we should, this is a space which needs to be more open to like flesh or blood, and yeah.
But think about your lactation, so great, because people that are, for example, trans and want to have children, so how do they deal with that topic? Like it becomes very interesting to see like how do you navigate? How do you bring into the conversation? You know, let's not make it a taboo, let's talk about. Adoption.
Yeah, but it should be then in an open way, you know, not you know, sort of not sort of going back. Otherwise it feels like falling back into sort of different feminism.
Yeah.
So essentialism of this is like an essentialized mother. So also,
Right.
so that's why sort of flesh, blood,
What does that mean to
abilities of
Yeah,
bodily
same
abilities,
issues,
health.
Yeah.
So
There's expanded views of motherhood.
Let's take one more comment and then we're gonna close.
To bring it together, what about queering motherhood?
Unlike motherhood.
But there are also people who on purpose do not want to be mothers or have problems with their mothers. So
there's something to think about here.
I think a bit of an issue too, because like, you know, Pope Francis said the other day, you know, he told religious women not to act like spinsters. Like, you know, so there is, it's the same type of thing. It's, you know, why are we associating all these terms with women, like, you know,
the effeminization of health or something.
I think, we have, go ahead, Elizabeth, last
Well,
word.
it's just, because I was at the table, I think that the conversation was very broad. I think there's a way around all these words. The sacredness of women's blood, there's just something that could be done. As another possibility, since you're probing as to what's next with Rosemary's work, it's still gonna be very fresh. It would be interesting if the panel might want to consider doing some of the things that got written up today.
Yeah.
I mean, it keeps momentum instead of a memorial.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point of this, is to really push, and because remember the question was, what was on her desk that's for you to
Yeah.
do? And I think that's really, to me, that's the most central question of all this. I'm going to, say thank you again and close us officially, because it's 6:01, and I don't like to go over the time. And, again, thank our IT people for helping us out. I hope you got a lot of good pictures. And, Rosalind and I will take a look at these materials down the pike, and we'll send out something. And thanks to Cap and to Tracy and to Elizabeth. Who am I missing here? Rosalind. And who am I missing? Elizabeth. Yeah. No, for reading the papers. I also think it's wonderful that people who said they could come but couldn't come for some very serious reasons sent their materials for us. And that says something about Rosemary as well. So maybe we could just take one 30-second moment together of quiet and give great praise and thanks in our own hearts for this wonderful woman. So let's just take literally 30 seconds. Thank you all very much, and thank you to the great and good Rosemary Ruther.